Today, I want to answer the question, are there closing costs on a land contract? Land contracts can be a powerful tool in real estate. They are a creative way to get deals done. But one question that typically comes up is, are there closing costs on a land contract? Well, by the end of this video, you'll have a full understanding of all the fees associated with a land contract, which will allow you to budget accordingly and to avoid unexpected expenses. This insider knowledge will help you negotiate better terms and potentially save thousands of dollars on your next deal. Did you realize that closing costs on a land contract can be significantly lower than a traditional mortgage? Or that some of the costs can be negotiated or even eliminated altogether? Well, let's dive into this by first explaining why somebody would want to utilize a land contract in the first place. Next, I'm going to explain the components within a land contract. And finally, how closing costs play a role for both the buyer and the seller. If you're ready, let's go. So when would you utilize a land contract in real estate? Well, first off, a land contract is a legal agreement for a seller finance purchase that doesn't involve the bank or traditional financing or mortgages. Because of that, the seller and buyer will negotiate on their own for payments done every month at a certain cadence, and understand that the seller retains title of the property until the land contract is paid for full. And at that time, the seller then transfers the deed over to the buyer. Now, the buyer does hold equitable title, but the deed is held by the seller until the land contract is paid in full. So what is the angle if you're a buyer on why you'd want to even use a land contract? Well, number one, it is an alternative to traditional financing, and it allows them to get in a home, especially if they have damaged credit, they don't have credit built up yet, maybe they don't have the money for a down payment or closing costs, or maybe they've been in a foreclosure or a short sale sometime in their past, which is going to discourage them from getting any type of traditional lending. So it can be an amazing tool. And a lot of times for a seller, the advantage there is that they are going to be able to get a sale done quicker than if they were to go through, say, a traditional sales process. It opens up the buyer pool a whole lot more when you can say, listen, you can buy my property, no money down, just start making payments, and I'm seller financing for you. All of a sudden, the pool of buyers completely opens up. So now let's talk about the components within a land contract. Well, the first thing, there's the price that you're selling the property at. What is the sales price? Now, what is the interest rate? Now, understand, because the seller is willing to take a risk on a buyer that can't get a traditional mortgage, a lot of times interest rates are going to be higher than a traditional mortgage. So that's also a component and negotiated within a land contract. There's going to be a down payment amount, right? That's going to be negotiated. It could be zero, it could be a certain amount, but once again, that's a component within a land contract that is specified. And even if that's zero, it is specified in the land contract. The monthly payment, how much a month is the buyer paying to the seller, and at what cadence? Is it on the first every month? And within this, it's really important that you understand, especially if you're the buyer, that is there a late period that could be made up? And if you miss a payment, can that be made up? Those specifics are so vital and so important when it comes to a land contract, because if you do not make payments, if you break the land contract, it is so advantageous to the seller where they can actually evict you from the property and keep all of the money that you've paid every single month for the last X amount of years if you miss a payment. That's why it needs to be specified in a land contract, and that's why it's an important element within there. And then finally, the amount that is due and the date where there's a balloon payment. Obviously, if you're buying a home from a seller and you're utilizing a land contract, you're paying a higher interest rate. And the goal of you should be able to get traditional financing at some point down the road. So a lot of times within a land contract is something called a balloon payment. It means that a certain date down the road, the buyer is going to be required to pay off the rest of that loan. And a lot of times it's when they refinance the property or they go to a bank and get a traditional loan at a lump sum that now they're paying the bank, not the seller, and that lump sum is paid by the bank to the seller, and now you're negotiating or you're working directly with the bank. One other important aspect of a land contract is what's called equitable title. As I mentioned this before, equitable title means that the buyer has equitable rights to own and get the deed of this property once it's paid off. Now, the seller has the deed and the title. It has the real title, right? Not equitable title. So there's a difference there, but specifying that within a land contract is important. And then just another important element that could be an addendum is who's responsible for maintenance, taxes, insurance, all that stuff. That typically falls on the buyer. So let's talk about closing costs when it comes to a land contract. Because there's no traditional lender, a lot of times you're going to have just some recording fees. You're going to have some title fees that are associated with it, but nothing as expensive as if you're dealing with a traditional mortgage company. So closing costs can all be negotiated, and there typically are closing costs when it comes to a land contract, but they are so much more minimal than a traditional mortgage. Now understand this, because each state is different, even some municipalities and counties are different, land contracts and rules and regulations around them can vary from state to state and even certain counties within the state. So I would highly recommend that if you are getting involved in a land contract, that you would have a real estate attorney that is familiar with land contracts to look this over for you to make sure you're protected, especially if you're a buyer. And if you're a seller, you also want a pair of real estate attorney eyes on that to make sure that you're protected as well. Now, land contracts are an amazing tool to build wealth utilizing some strategies like slow flip. But there's a strategy that I've come up with called cash flow flipping that flips slow flips on their head. And it's something that anybody can do in any market with little to no money out of your pocket. And it is an absolute game changer for you to build wealth quickly when it comes to real estate investing. And if you click on this video right here, it goes into detail about how I do this strategy of cash flow flipping, how I came up with it, how I do it, and how you can build massive wealth utilizing this strategy. Just click on this video. Thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.